everyone! Welcome back to another episode of the English Boost podcast. I'm Anna, here with my good friend and numbers enthusiast, Liam.
Numbers enthusiast, she says. Hi folks, I guess I'm your numbers guy today. But hey Anna, it's true, numbers are everywhere, whether we love them or not.
Exactly. And today, we're diving into a topic that might seem basic, but is actually super powerful. Numbers and counting in English. They're literally everywhere. From telling the time and counting your money to chatting about ages and addresses, it's one of those foundational skills that makes a real difference in fluency.
Yeah, it's like learning the ABCs, but for the math side of things, right? And don't worry, this isn't going to be a boring math class. We're bringing numbers to life with practical examples, fun exercises, and maybe even a story or two about our own mishaps with numbers in English.
Oh, I have a few stories for sure. So whether you're starting with 1, 2, 3, or you want to be able to confidently tell the time, count your change, or say your birthday without second guessing, this episode's got you covered.
Stick around because by the end of this episode, you'll be throwing numbers into conversations like a pro. And, spoiler alert, we're even sharing some fun expressions and a bit of math vocab at the end. You know, things like a dime a dozen or 2 cents worth.
So, grab a notebook and let's get into the wonderful world of numbers in English.
Alright, so let's kick things off with the basics, counting from 1 to 100. Now, I know it sounds elementary, but you'd be surprised at how tricky some of these numbers can be, especially when you're trying to sound natural.
Absolutely. I mean, let's face it, some numbers just like to trip us up. Take 13 and 30. They sound similar but mean two totally different things. Ever accidentally told someone you're 13 years old instead of 30?
Oh yeah, but really, those small pronunciation shifts make a big difference in English.
So true. And for everyone listening, it's really about mastering those little differences. If you're practicing counting from 1 to 100, try to pay attention to the stress and the teen versus tie endings. It's all in how you say it.
And here's a tip. Practice out loud and in short bursts. Don't try to tackle all 100 at once. Start with, say 1 to 20, get comfortable, and then move up. Little by little, you'll be able to count to 100 without a second thought.
Another common mistake is with numbers like 11 and 12. For whatever reason, those two seem to sound a bit different in English than they do in other languages. So don't stress if they trip you up at first. Just keep practicing, and soon enough, they'll feel natural.
And hey, a little humor can help too. I've found that counting in funny voices or adding some rhythm makes it stick a bit better. Try counting to 10 as if you're in a movie or even singing it out. It sounds silly, but trust us, it works.
Oh, I'm all for that. So there you have it, folks. Counting from 1 to 100, focusing on those tricky sounds and keeping it fun. Now that we've got the basics down, let's talk about where numbers actually come into play in real life. And trust us, they pop up everywhere. From telling time and counting money to measurements and sizes, numbers are all around us.
Oh, totally. I mean, think about it. How often do you need to tell someone what time it is or ask for change at a store? These are real-life situations where numbers become your best friends in English.
Right. So let's start with telling time, because that's one that tends to throw people off. There's this funny thing about English where we don't just say the numbers. Instead of saying 4:30, for example, we often say 4:30. It's like we're trying to make things sound a bit fancier.
Fancy indeed. And then there's quarter past and quarter to. For anyone listening, if you're not used to those terms, just remember, quarter past means 15 minutes after the hour, and quarter to is 15 minutes before. Once you get the hang of it, it'll roll off the tongue.
Exactly. Now, let's move to money. Numbers are huge here. And let's be real, knowing how to count your cash is a pretty useful skill. In English, though, you might notice we often say amounts a bit differently. For example, instead of $1.50, we often say $1.50. It's a little more casual.
Great point, Anna, and here's a little role-play exercise. Imagine we're in a cafe and I'm ordering a coffee. I might say, "Hey, Anna, how much is that?" And you'd reply, "Oh, that's $3.50. Super casual, but very typical in English.
Perfect example. And that works for prices at the store, too. Let's say you're grocery shopping. You'd hear $2.99 instead of $2.99. It's quick and easy.
All right, last one, measurements. English speakers use some unique measurements, like feet instead of meters and pounds instead of kilos. So when someone says, "Oh, it's 6 feet tall," they're talking about height in a way that's common in the US, for instance.
Absolutely, and it's good to at least be familiar with these terms, even if they seem a bit strange. The key takeaway: numbers in real-life situations are about quick, practical phrases. So, practice these with a friend or in the mirror, and soon you'll be ready to handle any number conversation.
Awesome! Coming up, we're tackling numbers in another important area: dates, ages, and addresses.
Alright, so let's talk about dates, ages, and addresses. 3 areas where numbers can feel like a bit of a puzzle if you're learning English. Dates are often confusing because in English, we have this specific way of saying them that can vary by country. For example, in the US, we say in April 5th, but in the UK, you might hear the 5th of April. It's the same date but just flipped around.
Yep, and that little difference can be tricky at first. So a good rule is just to know which style you're going with. If you're in an American setting, stick to month-day format, and for a British audience, go with day-month. And of course, when in doubt, just ask.
Great tip. Now ages. Here's where English tends to be pretty straightforward, but we do have some funny ways of saying it. Instead of saying, I have 25 years, like in some languages in English, we say, I am 25 years old, or simply, I'm 25.
Exactly. And once you know that structure, you can use it with any age. I'm 30, I'm 45, and so on. It's all about getting comfortable with that I am structure for age.
Now, let's tackle addresses, which can be a bit tricky because every country seems to have its own way of organizing them. In English-speaking countries, we typically start with the house number, then the street name. So, for example, 123 Maple Street.
Yeah, and if you're giving a full address, it goes something like 123 Maple Street, apartment 4B, city, state, zip code. So there's a flow to it, starting from the most specific, your house number, to the more general, like city and state.
It might feel a bit odd at first, but once you practice saying your own address in English, it'll feel much more natural. And knowing how to say dates, ages, and addresses confidently is such a huge boost, whether you're filling out forms, making appointments, or just having everyday conversations.
Totally agree. So practice these phrases, get used to the flow, and you'll find it gets easier with time.
So, we've got the basics down, we've tackled real-life scenarios, now let's have some fun with numbers in English. Liam, how do you feel about diving into a little quick math and some common expressions?
I'm all for it. Let's start with some math lingo. Now, don't worry, this isn't school math, but rather the kind of everyday language you hear around numbers. Like, for example, add up, take away, or even halfway.
Yes. For instance, if you're sharing a meal with a friend, you might say, let's split it in half. Simple, right? But it's so common in everyday English. Or if you're deciding on meeting times, you might say, let's meet halfway, meaning to compromise.
Great example! And let's not forget expressions. English has a lot of sayings with numbers, like a dime a dozen. That means something is really common, like, oh, those coffee shops, they're a dime a dozen around here.
Exactly. Another one I like is 2 cents worth, which means you're giving your opinion. So if you say, can I put in my 2 cents? You're asking if you can share your thoughts.
And here's one more for luck, second to none. This means something is the best with no competition, like this coffee shop is second to none. It's a great way to add a little flair to your compliments.
Love that one. And for any of you out there who feel a little nervous about quick math terms in English, don't worry, the more you hear and use them, the more natural they'll feel. Start small, like saying half or quarter, and build from there.
Right, and don't be afraid to throw in some of these expressions. They're not only fun, but also make you sound more like a native speaker. Plus, they add some personality to your English.
So, to wrap up this section, remember, numbers aren't just about math or counting. They're a part of everyday language and even culture. So try them out, have fun with expressions, and don't be afraid to make mistakes. And speaking of rap, that's a wrap on today's episode of the English Boost podcast. We hope you're feeling a bit more confident with numbers, whether you're counting, telling time, giving your address, or even throwing in some fun expressions.
Absolutely. Numbers might seem simple, but they really are the building blocks of so much conversation in English. And once you get the hang of them, it opens up a whole new world of confidence in daily interactions.
Couldn't agree more. So here's our little challenge for you. Try using numbers in English as much as you can this week. Maybe ask a friend what time it is, practice saying your birthday, or even use one of those expressions we talked about like a dime a dozen or my 2 cents worth.
And don't forget to have fun with it. Language learning is all about practice and a little bit of play. If you make mistakes, laugh it off and keep going. That's how we learn.
Thanks for joining us, everyone. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe and share it with anyone else learning English. We're here every week with new tips and conversations to help you on your journey.
And as always, leave us a comment or question if there's anything you'd like us to cover. We love hearing from you. Until next time, keep boosting that English confidence.
See you next time on the English Boost podcast.